There's a lot of talk right now about the IRS. Does it have too many people? What about the 85,000 that Biden wanted to add in 2022? What's going on? And here we have Doge trying to undo a lot of what Biden did. So today, we're going to discover how tax professionals would change the IRS so that it better serves the taxpayers of America. And you know me, I'm Tom Wheelwright, CEO of Wealthability and the Wealthability Show. And I have with me my darling wife, Louanne, who's also a tax professional. And we're going to have a little discussion today about how we might change the IRS, what's good about the IRS, what's bad about the IRS, and really what does the IRS, what needs to actually happen at the IRS. So, Louanne, thanks for being on the show today.
Good morning.
And if you would give our audience a little bit of your background, because it's pretty considerable.
I have been in this industry starting in 1987. This was my second career. Just the path of life brought me to this industry. Right now, I have my own practice and I serve primarily small business owners in a variety of industries and in a variety of states across the country.
So let's get right into it and talk about the IRS. So what do you think? Let's start with what the IRS does well. Okay. And in fact, even before that, what is the job of the IRS as you see it?
So from my perspective, I view the IRS as if it were the accounts receivable department of a big corporation. And so what would they do? They would be responsible for administrating the billing policies. In the case of the IRS, that would be the tax law. And they're responsible for assuring collection of the revenue that they're entitled to. That's the way I view the IRS. There's been a lot of different discussion about what the IRS does and doesn't do. But from my perspective, it's pretty clear. They would be the accounts receivable for the government, for the taxpayers.
So 2022, we had the Inflation Reduction Act.
Correct.
And they actually scored. In other words, they gave credit to revenue that the IRS would raise if they gave them more money. So actually adding under the congressional scoring system, they actually adding the IRS agents and adding $80 billion to the IRS would actually increase revenues. What do you think of that whole idea of the IRS, their job now not administering, but actually increasing revenues?
So I think one of the really important things to remember is that as taxpayers, we're required to pay what we owe under the law. We're not required to pay more, and we should not pay less. We're all responsible to pay what we owe, and that should be the baseline. I don't see that the baseline should be measured against some, other either realistic or artificial baselines. It should be what each taxpayer is required to pay. And that's going to vary taxpayer to taxpayer. But I think that should be the baseline. And if the revenue is not enough, then perhaps it's time to evaluate the tax law as opposed to implementing some of the very aggressive policies that we've seen the IRS take in recent years.
So let's talk about what the IRS does well, because they've done a few things really well over the last few years. Mm-hmm. You want to address some of the things you see that they do well?
One of the things that I was very, very impressed with was the IRS reaction to the CARES Act and some of the COVID provisions. They absolutely had to turn a huge agency on a dime to get all the stimulus payments out, all the taxpayer rebates out, and By and large, I think they did a very good job of that. I know certainly most of my clients received the money directly deposited to the bank in a pretty short timetable. So the IRS actually had to go into taxpayer records, identify those that they already had bank account information, and then get those payments out. There were others that went out by mail or via low credit card, but the IRS did that very well. Um, I personally really like what the IRS has done with the free e-file. I know there's an argument that there are other free options in the marketplace. Um, I would say in most cases they turn out not to be free. So I would be a proponent of that. I think there are many, many families out there that are paying $200, $500, $800, $1,000 to have their tax returns prepared. And the reality is, an IRS free system, they could do it without cost. So I like that idea. I like what they've done with it. In the past year and a half, they've also improved online technology services. So there's a lot that taxpayers can do online, a lot that tax professionals can do online that have not been available to us in the past. So those are three things in the last few years that I think the IRS has done a really good job on.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we can talk a little bit more about the free file. Actually in the next question, because what does the IRS do poorly? Now, there's a lot of animosity towards the IRS right now, right? And it hasn't always been that way.
No.
It was, I know when I started my career, and it was George H.W. Bush who, wanted a kinder, gentler IRS, right?
Correct.
And that has changed over the last, I don't know, 8 to 10 years, it seems.
Yes.
That they really treated their customers not as customers, but rather as adversaries. Is that fair?
That's very fair. We encounter that in instances of an audit. We encounter that just on a phone call. If we're calling in to perhaps assist a client come into compliance or resolve an issue, certainly this varies from agent to agent, but it's not uncommon to have the agent start the tone of the conversation is, well, your taxpayer should have done this, or you should have done that. We're calling to resolve the issue, and we immediately will. It's not uncommon to immediately get this pushback from the IRS. So I think a weak link in the IRS right now, and a huge problem, is the customer service. Their technology is poor. Their technology overall is inconsistent. The training of the agents that we encounter is inconsistent. Back when years ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago, when I would sit down with an IRS agent, I was sitting down across the table with someone with my same experience. They knew the tax law. They would start the audit by saying, we're assessing whether your client is substantially in compliance with the tax law. And that's not the direction most audits go nowadays. It is a checklist. They are trying to trip up the taxpayer. It's a very, very different tone that we encounter with the IRS right now.
So let's talk about customer service for a minute, because I want to go back to your idea that the IRS should serve as the accounts receivable department.
Correct.
So think about a business, and a business says, well, we're going to go after our customers, whether they're good or bad. It doesn't matter. They may have been paying completely on time all the time, but we don't believe them. Right. We don't trust them. Just because everything looks good on their tax return doesn't mean that they're not trying to do something to cheat us out of some of the money that we're entitled to. Right.
Correct.
And so because of that attitude, that's probably may say something about why people don't like the IRS. But also, let's talk about just general customer service, answering the phone. We've been hearing lately from the IRS that, hey, we answer the phone within like 5 minutes. Is that your experience as a tax professional?
That is not my experience. My experience is, if I'm going to call the IRS on behalf of a client, I need to block out about 2 hours of my time, because you're going to be on hold waiting for an agent, and then they're going to continue to put you on hold. They're going to say, let me check that out. I'm going to put you on hold for 5 to 7 minutes. And then they're going to say something along the lines of, I'm not able to access that right now. I'm going to put you on hold for 5 to 7 minutes. So if even for a relatively minor issue, such as tracking down estimated tax payments, why are the payments that the taxpayer made not reflecting on the IRS records? Hour and a half, hour and a half to confirm your payments. So if you're the accounts receivable department, that's a huge problem. First of all, that the payments aren't already reflected. People are making payments online. Checks have been canceled. The IRS does have the money, but for whatever reason, it's not on the account. And then therefore, we're sitting on hold, sometimes billing the client, sometimes not. Um, just trying to get even the most simple problems resolved.
So do you think that part of their, so let's address the problem. Is the problem they don't have enough customer service representatives, or is some of the problem that their technology is poor and so that they can't even get information out of their own system?
I think their technology is one of their biggest problems, because we'll also call in and they'll say, oh, my computer doesn't allow me to go there, or my computer's not working. Well, if your computer's not working, why are you answering the phone? Why are you not working on your technology, or getting your computer fixed? So I think technology is a huge issue for them. I personally would have liked to see them put more resources to improving the technology. But unfortunately, the training of the current IRS staff is very inconsistent. I have certainly had terrific experiences with agents where they've been very helpful and gone above and beyond. But I will tell you, in the last year and a half, probably half the calls is not that kind of experience, even to the point where I've had agents that actually give me incorrect information.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of that? Because we were talking about one the other day where the agent actually told you that you needed a power of attorney for every form number on the tax return, which meant you would have needed 50 powers of attorney.
Correct. So if you have a problem with your tax return and you ask your tax preparer to help you resolve it, what they're going to do is they're going to give you a power of attorney, ask you to sign it. It's going to say, for example, Form 1040, which is your individual return, or Form 1065, which is your partnership return. Your tax return, regardless of individual or business tax return, in many cases is going to be 30 pages, 50 pages, 100. I have clients where their tax returns 500 pages. And we're going to have many forms and schedules. And I called to resolve an issue that landed on the 1040, but the calculation was on a supporting form. And the IRS agent informed me that they could only talk about pages 1040, which would be pages 1 and 2. They could not discuss with me any of the other attached schedules, which is completely false. And so what I ended up having to do is hang up and get back on the phone, get on hold, and wait again. So I'm really fortunate. I know the tax law, and I know if they're giving me incorrect or correct information. If a taxpayer is trying to resolve these issues by themselves, they're going to assume the IRS knows what they're talking about. And sadly, that is not the case. I've encountered that not just on the phone, but in audits. Agents not having an education in accounting, much less tax. So they're trying to take positions. For example, one agent tried to take the position that the proceeds from a loan was income. Well, of course, that's not the case. We actually had to go to the supervisor to get that resolved. But those cases really should not happen at all. Period.
So let's talk about the role of tax professionals because most of our audience, they're entrepreneurs and investors. So they
Mhm.
have a tax professional that they're working with. And let's start with a number of years ago. We were at the National Tax Conference for the AICPA, right?
Correct.
The
Yes.
American Institute of CPAs.
Mhm.
And what we heard from the then commissioner of the
Yes.
Internal Revenue Service about our role as tax professionals, his view of our role.
Okay, so the lead statement was that the tax preparer, tax professional, is the first line of tax compliance. And our issue with that is the tax advisor and the tax professional is an advocate for the taxpayer. They do not work for the IRS. They do not represent the IRS. They represent the interest of the taxpayers. And like I said at the beginning, you're required to pay what you owe, not more. Not more. So if you're entitled to a deduction, if you're entitled to a provision under the tax law that reduces your tax liability, you are entitled to take it. You should take it, but you do need to follow the laws in terms of meeting the IRS, meeting the Internal Revenue Code provisions, and you do need to document. If you don't do those two things, then you have a problem. And in those cases, the IRS would legitimately question that. So it's really important to evaluate what your tax circumstances are with your professional.
Right. So if you think about, and if you have a health issue,
Mm-hmm.
right, you want to make sure you've got an advocate, that
Correct.
your primary care physician
Correct.
is your advocate with other specialists and other aspects of the medical community, including insurance,
Yes.
right? And because you need an advocate, you
Correct.
need somebody on your side.
Correct.
And that's our job as tax professionals to be
Absolutely.
your advocate with the IRS. So we are not impartial and we are not, um, ex- we're not really expected under the law to be impartial. We're expected to be an advocate. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have to follow the law because we have to sign under penalties of perjury,
Correct.
just like the taxpayer does, right, on that tax
Absolutely.
return. And we have to make sure that we're doing our job. But at the same time, we don't work for the IRS.
We do not work for the IRS. We work for the taxpayer.
All right. So right now, the IRS is viewed more unfavorably than they have perhaps in many, many years.
In
Okay.
in probably most of my career. Correct.
So is that reputation deserved? And why do you think that is?
Um, gosh, I think part of it, unfortunately, is deserved. The IRS has taken some very aggressive positions, in my opinion. Um, they have gone after provisions in the tax law that are within the law. They've taken aggressive positions. I think, unfortunately, some of that was generated by people abusing certain
For
provisions.
sure.
But I think they've taken very, very aggressive positions. Um, I also think that the way that taxpayers and professionals are treated during interactions, such as audits, such as telephone conversations, um, carries over. I mean, if you're first if I'm a taxpayer and I'm trying to get something and I call and encounter an agent that is either condescending or rude or doesn't know what they're talking about, I'm going to tell everybody I know, what happened. Um, and I think part of the problem is the IRS has lost, without getting into a discussion of how many people should they have, over the past, what do you say, 8 or 10 years, they've lost a lot of really talented people. And so there's a void. I think there's a big void in terms of the professional expertise in the customer service arena of the IRS. Certainly, they have a lot of attorneys, whatnot, but the people that answer the phone, the people that handle simple audits, things like that,
But so over the last, well, pre predominantly this last administration,
Mhm.
they went after high income taxpayers. They had these audit programs where if you had $1 million, a positive income, even if your net income was zero,
Mhm.
but if your positive income, ignoring all the negatives on your tax return, was
Correct.
over $1 million, your likelihood of audit went way up.
Mhm.
Okay. And so they've audited a bunch of high income taxpayers. Now, you've done a little research on this.
Yeah.
And what have they found as far as what the results have been with those audits as compared to an average audit?
Yeah. So generally, the more sophisticated the taxpayer, the more in compliance they're going to be. Um, the less sophisticated the taxpayer, the more errors, the more non-compliance you see. So they're putting a huge amount of resources into kind of just, kind of attacking these certain groups, whereas the efficiency could be much better used in terms of technology and education for the taxpayers. So,
So can you give us some examples of that?
so this was partnership. It was a part.
Okay.
They are recently going after partnerships, and with the expectation that most partnership returns would be out of compliance. And thus far, that effort has shown that more than 80% of the partnerships are actually in compliance with the tax law. It's not to say there might be a mistake, but all these revenue going towards partnerships is thus far not generating a lot of return.
So in your experience, where and actually we've looked at the statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Where's more of the non-compliance in what kind of income range is that non-compliance typically in, and where is that non-compliance?
So most of the non-compliance is in the arena of small businesses. And so this is one of the areas that we saw last week.
And
There
small business being like under $200,000, right?
$200,000, maybe gross receipts, maybe gross receipts even under three to 500,000, but certainly under 200,000, there's a very high proportion of non-compliance. Some of these taxpayers are trying to do their tax return themselves, so they don't really know what they're doing. We see court cases a couple a month, two or three a month, where small business taxpayers go all the way to court and they lose because either their tax return is not consistent with the law or they don't have the documentation. So this is the area that they just cut 3,500 agents from. This is the area where you see the highest proportion of non-compliance. These are also the people that come to your house and say, it's going to be $120 for me to fix your sprinklers, but if you pay me cash, it's $90. Why the 30% discount? That's not the credit card fee. That's not the cost of processing a check. It's
basically a five-finger discount.
Yes, I'm going to put this money in my pocket. So, unfortunately, that is the reality. The other area is there's a large number of taxpayers that simply don't file. In the last year, the IRS dedicated resources to try and collect some of this revenue. In 2024, they collected over $1 billion from 1,600 taxpayers that had not filed. So,
it's a lot of money per taxpayer.
It's a lot of money per taxpayer. So again, examples of allocating resources that result in revenue coming in, as opposed to allocating resources for the agenda of whoever might have these ideas.
Is in office at
Correct.
the time, right?
Correct.
So in 2022, Congress gave the IRS $80 billion.
Correct.
Right, over
Yes.
a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then they brought it back $20 billion. So now we're talking about $60 billion, right?
I think they brought
Even more than
Another
that.
20 is another 20 suspended. Yes,
So a total of 40 has been suspended.
I believe so.
Okay. So, but this $40 billion is still a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Okay. So originally, that was to be split a little bit to customer service,
Correct.
right? A little bit more to technology,
Correct.
very heavily to audits,
Correct.
and then about $25 billion to a slush fund.
Yeah, general and administrative.
General and administrative, which I'm going, seriously, that's the part, if you're a business owner, it's the G&A that you're trying to, that's what we call it. We have a word for it in accounting. It's called G&A, general administrative expenses. That's the part you're trying to cut. That's never the part you try to increase. You're always trying to cut that piece. And I think of the 80 billion, originally only $3.5 billion was dedicated to customer service. And I think like 4.6 to technology. All right. So you're in charge and you have this money. Where would you allocate it?
Boy, I'd put a big chunk of it into technology because the IRS has so much data from not only tax returns, but other information. So I pay my mortgage. At the end of the year, I get my interest statement. The bank sends the IRS copy. My wages, my 1099s, my investment accounts, your K1s. The IRS has a huge amount of data. And if they had the capability of taking that data and evaluating it with technology, as opposed to right now, much of that, you still have people manually going through things. You could probably find errors, you could find omissions, you could identify tax returns that are inconsistent with trends or norms. I think your return on investment would be huge with technology. But I really think they need to invest in their customer service, the people that answer the phone. These people need to answer the phone in a timely manner. They need to be informed. They need to be educated. They need to be able to answer taxpayer questions. Saying, I don't know the answer to that, you'll have to call back and get another agent, is unacceptable. That would not happen in my business. If a client called in, that would not happen in Tom's business. And any of you out there that have a business, that would be an unacceptable answer. They have to be educated. Over the next 6 years, about 60%, 63% of the IRS workforce is going to be looking at retirement. They're eligible for retirement. So I've just told you we've lost a lot of agents. We could lose up to, or IRS personnel, we could lose up to additional 60%. And the training period is about 2 years. And so I do think there needs to be investment in qualified customer service representatives.
So would you pull funding from the IRS or would you simply reallocate the funding?
I like the idea of it being pulled over a time frame. I wish I knew the magic number, but I would rather see dollars allocated to more specific tasks, and then measurement, and then more dollars as needed for certain departments. I think just huge amount of money. I mean, think about it. If all of a sudden I get a $50,000 bonus, what happens to it? Boy, that can go pretty quick. Did I meet my objectives? Maybe, maybe not. So I think the IRS does need funding. I think they need to be accountable. I think there needs to be oversight. And I think there has to be consistency in terms of the way the IRS has to operate.
So one of the things we talk about in business all the time is culture.
Yes.
And how important the culture is into how our employees talk to our customers, how the employees get along with each other. And How, how do you think the culture has changed in the IRS over the last 20 years?
From sometimes I'll get an agent, they've been there a long time and they're very free in sharing. The culture in the IRS is pretty low right now. The people that I encounter that are able to, really help me, they're tired, they're burned out. Um, they're 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 getting shuffled from one department to another. So maybe they joined the IRS and they had an expertise in this one area. Now they're just being moved all around. So they have a morale problem. I think based on what happened last week, I think you're going to see a little more chaos in the IRS. But there's definitely a morale problem. There's definitely um, the culture could use a lot of improvement.
Do you think that, so I'm a big, as you know, I'm a big fan of technology and putting the money to technology because, there are certain states that have proven that technology can really increase compliance. New York
New York.
is particularly known for that, where they've used technology to say, well, look, if you had this many lottery ticket sales, then at your grocery store, then your grocery store should have this kind of receipts. So we're going to do an audit because it doesn't match up. It's not relative. And with AI, you would think that we could actually do maybe even put money into technology and take it out of the workforce where the only people left are a few auditors. You still have to have your revenue agents because there are dishonest people in the tax-paying public, and but you have some customer service people. But even that, a lot of customer service, I mean, they have improved that part.
They've improved,
right? The online customer service, but that could be even improved more. But let's think about even just some of the simple stuff. So you have a client who gets an IRS audit.
Yeah.
Do they have access to the tax return?
No, the IRS does not have access to the tax return.
This should be shocking to everybody.
The first thing they ask us for is, can you please give me a copy of I'm going to audit 2023. Can you please give me a full copy of the 2023 tax return? And by the way, could I also see the 2022 tax return? But because it's very common for tax attributes in one year to carry over to another. So that's how much their hands are tied.
Well, and how do they communicate besides phone?
Fax
machines. Most of you don't even know what a fax machine is, right? This is the most antiquated technology really that we have, and yet the IRS doesn't have a portal, just a secure portal that we can upload. Obviously, based on ProPublica's release, they don't even have secure anything at the IRS. So let's start, my view is let's start with customer service. Let's start there. As a business owner, I'm always going to start with customer service. I want my accounts receivable people, they need to be the nicest people that I hire. Yes. They need to be the most professional, the most informed, and the ones who actually care the most about the clients.
Correct.
And the customers, right?
Correct.
Is they're the ones saying, hey, I'm guessing there's just a mistake. All right. And, just want to make sure that our records match your records. And can we just have that conversation? And
correct.
Can you maybe send us some support? So like the notices that, somebody gets in the mail because they didn't report a W-2 right, or they didn't report a 1099 properly. That's not what we're talking about. I mean, those are fine.
Right.
I mean, that's the kind of compliance that we need to have. But like a while back, there was the IRS released data that there were 250,000 S corporation returns. These are passed through small businesses with over $100,000 of net income that paid no salary.
Correct.
Which is not appropriate under the law.
Inconsistent with the law.
So here you have 250,000. Why don't we go after those people? Why don't we go to those people and say, hey, let's have a conversation about this. We think you ought to be paying at least some salary here because you must be working there. You're not just an owner. You got some. You got to have somebody's got to be doing the work, and yet you have 250,000 that are not paying any salary at all.
And that is so easy to track because on an S corporation tax return, we're going to put gross receipts, we're going to put net income, and we're going to put on a specific line shareholder distributions.
Right.
So if there is 100,000 in shareholder distributions and there's zero in salary, you would think the most basic computer would be able to say, hey, inconsistent with the tax law, let's kick it out. Another example of what Tom was talking about in New York, in terms of how the technology can assist in the compliance, is there was a restaurant that said they were closed on Sundays, but their liquor license was for 7 days a week. And by matching records within the various agencies, they were able to identify that Sunday was cash pay. And so that's why I say the IRS has so much information,
Or could have,
disposable to identify areas of noncompliance and then professionally and appropriately collect that revenue.
All right. So in conclusion here, so you'd start with customer service.
Customer service.
That's where you'd go.
Absolutely.
And then you go to technology,
Mm-hmm.
right? You wouldn't necessarily cut, but you probably would be able to cut the funding once you had the technology in place and the customer service in place. Because my experience with customer service is, if you have a good culture and a positive customer service experience, which I know is hard to imagine with the IRS. I mean, nobody really wants an IRS audit. Let's face it. Nobody even wants to file a tax return.
Right.
They're not really, I'm the government. I'm here to help you. That's
right.
That really is an appropriate meme, right? That's just not going to be the case.
That's not going to change.
But on the other hand, it doesn't have to be completely adversarial where we're out to get you, and we can have that better relationship with the IRS. And certainly who they should be treating the best, in my opinion, is actually the tax professionals.
Yes.
Because we're trying our best to help our clients.
Correct.
Accurately produce their tax return, pay the right amount of tax, not the most amount of tax, the right amount of tax. And we're looking at, we're going to look at, all right, is there an argument here for a certain position? And we might have a disagreement, but that's okay. It's just like if you have a client and you have a fee disagreement, well, you pick up the phone, and you have a conversation about that fee. And then you go, well, I don't think this fell, but here's where, and you come up with some kind of an in-between, right, that makes sense for you. So there are some things that we can do to the IRS, right? For the IRS could actually do that would probably save money at the same time as increase in compliance, but recognizing that even after all of these audits and all this increase in audit, they've still found that we have an 85% compliance rate, which is the best in the world, right? So while we'd love to have a 95%, 100% compliance rate, recognizing that's not realistic, what are your final words about what you think maybe ought to happen? Both Congress, tax professionals, and the IRS.
Yeah. Well, I would say right now the tax law is extraordinarily complex. And like I said, I've been doing this since 1987. At that time, we did tax returns by hand. I would not even begin to try and, and you see everyone's, people still do that. I don't know how they do that. So I think we have to recognize that under the current law, it is extremely complex. I think tax professionals have a responsibility to educate their clients, both on how they're supposed to report it, and what provisions are available for them to reduce their tax. But you have to be consistent across the board. I occasionally hear stories of tax professionals that do wink, wink, okay, let's pretend we don't have that conversation. I think that is unfair to the taxpayer, and it's inconsistent with our responsibility. The other thing is there have been instances when I've been in an audit and I can see the agent does not know the law. I have actually said, would you like me to make that calculation? Would you like me to write that for your report? So, hopefully if I can help further the education of that agent, that's going to help another taxpayer, another tax professional down the road. So it's really nice when we can work as a team, recognizing and respecting their responsibility while still advocating for our client's position.
No, I agree. I always tell the auditor, if I'm on that first meeting with the auditor, that my job is to help their job go smoother.
Correct.
Right. That is my job. And sometimes it is education. I actually did have one ask me to write their report for them, or a section of the report for them.
Sure.
Because I did understand that part of the law better than they did. And it makes sense. I mean, I have 45 years of experience. Some of them have barely 1 or 2 years of experience. And so there's no way they're going to know the law as well as an experienced tax professional is. And so I do think that there's that relationship, but they can't be adversarial.
No.
And we shouldn't be adversarial to them either.
No,
right?
no,
That's not fair either.
We are always courteous when IRS agents come. I always make sure they have adequate, comfortable space. They're not allowed to even take a glass of water, so I respect that. I don't even offer that. I might tell them where they can find water or food, but I always try and treat them respectfully, because I expect them to treat me and my client respectfully. And I think that that's the way the relationship should be, always with the government agencies.
The reality is you've done a lot of tax planning over your career.
I have.
As I have. And there's a lot that is in the tax law to actually benefit the taxpayer. And one of the things I'd like to see the IRS not do is legislate. In other words, write regulations that are not interpreting the law, but actually making law.
Right.
And I'm hoping that this Wheelwright decision from the Supreme Court that we got last year should help that quite a bit. And frankly, I'll look at, do we need so many regulations? And, can we just let the law stand on its own? And yes, we're going to have differences of opinion on interpretation. And if it's a big enough issue, it's going to go to court. And we're
going to have court cases as well.
And we'll actually have court cases that actually give us some guidance. And that's okay too. So, I do think there's a lot that can be done. I'm totally agree with you. I think customer service first. I think technology second. I actually think culture is right up there as well. But in the meantime, it's up to us to do what we need to do in order to understand the law. That's why I wrote my books, Tax-Free Wealth and Win-Win Wealth Strategy, so we can understand the law, so that you have a competent professional who will educate you, make sure you get educated, because a lack of education from the taxpayer is not an argument for the taxpayer, right?
It is not a get out of jail free card to say I didn't know the law.
They won't even get out of the penalty.
No. And as a matter of fact, if you try and use the excuse, I relied on my tax professional, and it's apparent that the tax professional was not following the law, that's not a good excuse either. So I think one of the things that you should expect from your tax professional is ongoing education. We're getting tax law. We've had like eight major pieces of legislation.
And we're about to get another one.
We're going to get another one since 2018. You should expect education from your tax professional. Your tax return is worth nothing to you, absolutely nothing. The education is where your value is. So if you want to protect yourself from audits or bad news from the IRS, that's where you need to start, is education with your tax professional. and hold them accountable too. I mean, if your tax bill is not what you think it should be, you should say, walk me through it. Tell me why. What can I do differently? Is there anything I can do differently?
So I think we should have a whole nother podcast just on the role of a tax professional. I think that would be fun. Are you up for that?
We could say a lot about that.
Because we see a lot of bad tax professionals, we see good tax professionals and everything in between. But the education is an important part. Remember that when you get educated, and if you like this podcast, if this was useful to you, please click like, please share it with your friends and your colleagues. And please get educated and make sure your tax professional is educating you and that your tax professional is educated, because when you do that, you always make way more money and pay way less tax. We'll see you next time on the Wealth Ability Show.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.